Upon first encountering it, Blood and Gnome could appear to be a zany, silly setting, considering that the four core races presented for players are the titular gnomes, along with goblins, halflings, and half-elves. But that would be an incorrect assessment of what Blood and Gnome truly offers. Yes, gnomes and halflings, and to a lesser extent goblins, have been typically presented in fantasy games as somewhat light-hearted, mirthful character types, and it is not that this aspect of the general lore of tabletop fantasy is incorrect in Blood and Gnome. It is that those stereotypes about these fantasy races are terribly out of date by the time in which Blood and Gnome takes place. Blood and Gnome takes place at the end of history, the last stage of a generalized fantasy world. The humans are gone. So are the elves and dwarves. Humanity's continent-spanning empire has fallen, and then risen again as undead. An empire ruled by vampires and liches, masters of armies of zombies and skeletons, and of mutant serfs, all designed to sustain themselves on the blood of halflings, now that humans are no longer available to be fed upon. A world where any race that does not submit utterly to vampiric authority is forced into hiding. Some may be idle enough to sit and wait in their underground hiding places for the armies of orcs storming out of the north to topple and destroy the undead empire, but many are those among them who would look upon that possibility with as much dread as they hold for their current circumstances. Many are the stories of the brutality of the orcs from the days before the great empire of man, and so waiting for them to take care of the vampire problem on behalf of the core races seems short-sighted. Better for the gnomes, goblins, and halflings to take care of the problem on their own terms. Goblins were one of the three original races of fairy folk who came to the mortal world as refugees from their dying lunar homeland, along with the elves and dwarves. They arrived in the midst of a great prehistoric war, pitching the giants against dragonkind for dominance over the lesser races of that age. With their purposes aligned, the elves, dwarves, and goblins were able to form a third front in the war, spelling a quick defeat for the already beleaguered giants, which was soon followed by the retreat of dragonkind to the edges of the world after the lizardmen armies were vanquished and banished to the south for the rest of history. But the wars of prehistory were not over quite yet. The dragon's deceit turned the minds of the dwarves over to uncertainty and paranoia. If they did not move quickly, the elves would seize all the world for themselves, or so they thought. Paranoia led to fighting. Fighting led to war, and both races turned to their goblin cousins to take their side in the conflict. For their refusal to be turned against their own fellow fair ones, the goblins were branded as cowards and traitors by elf and dwarf alike. They were cast out of the lands claimed by both, and forced into hiding in the dark corners of the world. As the giants and dragons had used the ogres and lizardmen as foot soldiers and cannon fodder for their war, so too did the elves and dwarves make their own creations to fight on their behalves, orcs and humans. For another millennia they struggled, until finally accepting the stalemate between them, and so it was that quietly and with little fanfare the armies of the fair ones turned about and went home, and that prehistoric time came to a close. The age of adventure had now begun. Rejected by the other fairy folk, the goblins devolved into a state of primitive banditry, living in swamps and rocky badlands, and eventually within the sewer systems beneath human cities as they started to appear. Across the breadth of the Age of Adventure, an era which spanned at least 10,000 years, goblinkind was regarded as a minor, nuisance-level threat, little better than intelligent vermin with limited tool use. You would find them working on occasion for bandits and thieves' guilds, or as servants to petty wizards and witches, but they had no real kingdoms of their own, nor any ambition other than to sate their hungers and lusts. Once the orcs had come to them, offering them great reward if they would help the orcish warbands of that era to infiltrate and wipe out the growing human kingdoms in the Heartlands. But it was to be a campaign that never got off the ground. Both sides tell their own versions of what happened, always to blame the other for it, but after so many thousands of years later, in truth neither goblin nor orc truly remember what happened to make them despise one another so much. Not long after this rift between the goblins and their modified orc cousins formed, rumors emerged from the north that a second kingdom of dragons had been established, and would soon stage an invasion of the temperate lands where elf, human, and dwarf had settled. Dwarves and elves consulted with each other closer than they had since they first arrived in the mortal world, and between them dug up the ancient and powerful magic of the meteor storm. With it, the dragon kingdom was destroyed, along with the very land they dwelt upon. The Ring Mountains rose, and for 1,000 years glaciers covered the northern wastelands before melting away back into the sea. As the ice retreated, the orcs exiled themselves to this barren land. Soon after, goblins heard the first rumors that the dwarves had retreated deep underground, sealing off the entrances to their subterranean cities, lest anyone dare to follow them. For a brief and uncomfortable period of time, the goblins found themselves as public enemy number one among the human nations, as the age of adventure drew to a close. With the retreat of the elves to parts unknown, the age of adventure slammed shut, and the great empire of man rose to span the entire continent. A unification of human kingdoms with those of their halfling cousins, and the gnomes of the imperial shield. Barely a century into the great empire's reign, the goblins found themselves being hunted down, dragged out of their swamps and hidey holes, and brought to the human cities in the imperial core. To their shock, instead of imprisonment or mass executions, the goblins were handed over to the guilds of craft and industry. They were properly fed and clothed, taught how to read and behave in polite company. They rehabilitated the goblins, bringing them back into the brotherhood of civilized peoples. No matter how low humankind fell afterwards, up until their disappearance, the goblins will forever consider themselves to be in debt to humanity. That they would be trusted to do all the minor jobs that neither human or halfling wanted to do themselves was not seen as an insult. For the first time ever, they were being treated as valuable members of society, no matter how petty and mundane the tasks they were set to may be. They were treated more as equals by the humans of the great empire than they ever experienced from their own fey relatives, who ranked the goblins as the least of their kind. And disappear humankind did, at the very end of the first 1,000 years of their empire's reign. At the stroke of midnight, and poof, gone, vanished in the blink of an eye without a trace. Even their immortal souls failed to appear in their afterlife, to join the ghosts of previous generations. For the once noble empire had turned to decadence and devil worship, committing sins on such a scale that the very gods had been struck silent. A few goblins were among the early adopters of druidic revivalism there at the end of the empire, which plotted to push back against the devil cults and stage a rebellion if the nobility refused to bow to the will of the peasantry. But it was already too late. Humanity's fate had already been sealed. At the stroke of midnight of the 28th day of the month of the Griffin, in the 999th year of the great empire's reign, humankind simply winked out of existence, leaving only a few struggling mutants and ghouls in their place. Cities stood empty. Fires burned out of control. The goblins in the imperial core quickly rallied with the other non-humans who dwelt within the great empire, the gnomes, halflings, and a handful of human families with distant elven ancestry. They tried to save the old empire, but it was all for naught. For the monsters that had lurked in humanity's shadow were now unfettered, and starving from the sudden loss of their food supply. As the vampires gathered at Palace Colossus and named one of their own as emperor, hordes of undead were raised to seize control of the imperial apparatus. The halflings were harvested, placed on cruel farms to be slaughtered like livestock to quench the vampire's thirst. Half-elves and gnomes were massacred. Those with elven blood fled north out of the imperial core if they could, while the gnomes were forced underground. Goblin kind, with the greatest population of all the core races, submitted to the rule of the vampire emperor. The guilds of craft and industry that managed their lives and education had left them ill-prepared for military engagements at scale, and the armies of undead would have wiped them out if they had offered too much resistance. But from the get-go, the goblin guilds had a plan. They would play for time while building up their own military assets. using their access to the Imperial Core as trade allies of the vampires to infiltrate and map out all of the vampires' tactical weaknesses. They have spent the last century rescuing what halflings they believe they could get away with freeing and smuggling them to sanctuaries across the western inland sea. They have also become the world's largest and most far-ranging nautical power, with small colony settlements around the continent's many coasts set up to support cargo ships as they, using trade with the vampires' distant allies at Durade or the Sundered Mountains, as cover to explain their seagoing ventures. Decades of battle with invading warbands of orcs out of the northern hinterlands has kept the undead legions occupied and distracted, and now, seemingly out of nowhere, the gnomes have sent envoys to the goblin guilds, seeking to convince them to enter a conspiracy to topple the vampire nobility and secure the throne, before the orcs do so for themselves. The goblins agree that the undead are precariously positioned, but seizing the throne and holding off the advancing orcs, who may still want to take the throne of Empire regardless of who may be sitting on it, are two very different proposals. And for that matter, even if they did manage to dislodge Emperor Kenrex, who exactly do the gnomes propose take his place? They suspect it will not be a goblin, and this streak of suspicion makes them hesitant towards the gnomes' proposal. But they also remember that before humanity fell, the humans of the Great Empire had had a dream, that all the intelligent peoples living on the world's lone continent could be united together in a common beneficial society. One that combined the short-lived human zeal for advancement, the halflings' love of luxury, the ancient wisdom and mastery of the gnomes, and the feverish inventiveness of the goblins, into something greater than any of them could have achieved on their own. And so, for now, the goblins are on board with the gnomes' grand plans, though they will be watching their allies closely, because the gnomes are correct about one thing. Better it be them than the orcs to replace the vampire emperor. In terms of the hard facts about goblins and Blood and Gnome's rules, they receive attribute modifiers of +2 to their senses and -2 to appearance. They have a fairly wide range of heights, anywhere from 3 feet tall to 4.5 feet, but they are short enough for them to be classified as a small-sized race, like halflings and gnomes. They have night vision, wolf-like hearing, and have an average lifespan of 120 years. They are restricted from taking the classes of Berserker, Noble, Shaman, and Wizard. Blood and Gnome is available now in print on demand via Amazon.com, and the PDF can be found for $10 less on TTRPG. Links will be provided below. Hit like and comment for more lore videos about Blood and Gnome. And until next time, stay wastonated.
Everybody dance now. Everybody.
I am going to make you sweat, baby. Let the music take control. Let the rhythm move you. Sweat.
Sweat.
Let the music take control. Let the rhythm move you. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Come on, let's sweat, baby. Let the rhythm take control. Let the rhythm move you. Sweat.
Sweat.
Let the music take control. Let the rhythm move you. Let's do it right. Move me all night. The music is my life. Everybody dance now. Everybody dance now. Everybody dance now. Everybody, I'm going to make you sweat, baby. Let the music take control. Let the rhythm move you. Sweat, sweat. Let the music take control. Let the rhythm move you. Do 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 do. do